Today's topic is going to be canceling a get. Okay, it's a very interesting topic. I want to give a little bit of background. I also took into consideration the feedback I got last week, and I decided to design the class a little bit differently. What we're going to do is, it's still going to, if you're more advanced in the issues that came up, were not issues for you, don't worry. It's still going to be accessible to multiple levels. What we're going to do is like this. I'm going to give a short, a bit of a longer introduction than usual, which I think will help you also in terms of the chavruta. Maybe I haven't been giving long enough introductions. The second thing I'm going to do is we're going to break for one longer chavruta time. I'm going to try it out this week. I'm happy to hear feedback at the end how that goes. And I designed the material a little bit differently in terms of the order. What we're going to do is first, I gave all the sources that are Gemara based. So the Mishnah, the Gemara, and some Rashi, but at the end are all the extra commentaries. And that way, if all you have is time to get through the Gemaras, that's great. And all the extra sources are at the end. They're labeled extra sources. So that means you really don't have to feel any need to get to those sources. And if you do, great. And then instead of having those sources relate to each part, each section, in the beginning of each extra source, it's very clear which part of the shiur relates to, and you can learn it like that. So I hope that that will be helpful for people. So first of all, I just want to thank everybody for giving me feedback, because it's always very helpful, especially when you're not in a classroom and you can't speak to people and see them. It's very helpful for the feedback. So thank you. Okay, those of you who are learning and are not on the Zoom, you're also welcome to share feedback with us by email. We're always happy to hear from our learners. Okay. What we're going to talk about today is get. Actually, the whole chapter, and this is really where we got into Tikun Olam. Okay, we kind of went out of order, and we started with Pidyon Shvuyim, with redeeming captives. We switched gears last week to a different topic. Now we're back. We're really with our first Mishnah of the section of the chapter, which is how the Mishnayot got off our track of onto Tikun Olam. What we learned is that what we talked about the first class, and I'll just review, maybe you also missed the first class, is that the Mishnayot are organized often by things that are similar, even if, right, they're off topic of the Masechet. So we're in the middle of Masechet Gitin, and because of this Mishnah, where they mentioned something that Rabban Gamliel is going to institute because of Tikun Olam, from there we ended up with a slew of Mishnayot that all talk about Tikun Olam. Okay, so that's number one to notice. Before we read the Mishnah, I just want to talk to you about a few basic facts about get that are important to know. So first, I'm going to read you from the Torah, where it talks about getting a get. A get is a divorce document. Okay, how do we know it has to be a document, right? You don't have to get married with a document. You can get married with a document, even though I don't know anyone who's done that, right? Most people get married with a ring, but you could actually get married with a document if you wanted. But divorce is not like that. Divorce has to be done only with a document. We'll talk about that very shortly, why that is. So the Gemara, the Torah starts off in Devarim, chapter 24. Ki yikach ish isha u'ba'ala, when a man takes a woman and has relations with her in the sense of marriage. V'haya im lo timtza chen be'einav. By the way, that's all that's mentioned in the Torah about marrying a woman. Okay, Homosechet Kiddushin based on those few words. V'haya im lo timtza chen be'einav. And if she doesn't find favor in his eyes, ki matzah be'ervat aval. Okay, I'm not going to get into all the details of this, but maybe he finds something repulsive about her, or something. Okay, we're not going to get into what that is exactly. V'chatav la sefer kritut. It's a whole big machloket on what basis can a man divorce a woman. Is it anything? What if she burns his food? Does it have to be something more serious? Because the pasuk definitely sounds like it might have to be something more serious. Maybe not. In any case, that's not our topic. V'katav la sefer kritut. He has to write for her a book of separation. V'natam biyadav v'shilcha mibeito. There's a few adjectives here, verbs that have to happen here. So he has to write her a book that separates them. He has to give it to her in her hand. She has to then have it in her hand. V'shilcha mibeito. And in that way, he basically sends her away from his house. Okay, so the question is, what needs to be done? Number one, a book needs to be written. Usually a sofer writes it, a scribe. It has to be given to her, and he basically sends her out from the house. Okay, now the first thing to note is that this is all happening. The man is doing all of this. The woman is kind of passive other than she gets the get. And in fact, by Torah law, a get can be given to a woman against her will. Okay, Rabbeinu Gershom puts in takana in the 11th century, and he says, this is not acceptable, right? We're basically going to insist, just like in Kiddushin, in marriage, betrothal, that a woman and a man both it has to be consensual. Also divorce, she has to agree to it as well. And that's why, again, we're not going to get into all these fascinating topics today, but this is what we call a heter me'er rabbanim. This is why it's easier if there's, right, we all are familiar with issues of what we call a mesurevet get, a woman who can't get a get. There's also men who can't get gets, a mesurav get, okay, where the wife will be unwilling to give it to him. It's much easier to get away with that because it's all based on a takana Rabbeinu Gershom, and it's not by Torah law. So that's why there's something called the heter me'er rabbanim, if you've heard of it, a heter of 100 rabbis, and they can basically all sign and say, we insist, right? We basically are going to allow him to get married without the get because they can override the takana Rabbeinu Gershom if you have 100 rabbis that agree to this. Whereas a woman, you can't do that because the Torah law, if the husband is unwilling to give the get, then it's much more of a serious problem because by Torah law, you have to have the man give the get willingly. And that's going to be part of the basis of our sugya today, is that you need to have the man give the get willingly. So now, before we move on, I want to say a few more things. Okay, so number one, the woman, basically, if you look at her perspective, what she needs to do, number one, she needs to accept the get. Okay, so theoretically, she doesn't, you could say, what if she doesn't accept it, but they can somehow give it into her, it could be put in her domain and somehow get around that. And she kind of seems like she has to somehow leave the house. Okay, maybe, right? There has to be some sort of leaving, but again, it doesn't seem like it's necessary. The Sefer HaChinuch gives some reasons as to why it has to be done with a get, which is just interesting. Again, this isn't so germane to our point, but it's hard to start teaching about this without giving you some really interesting information. He says there's two reasons, and I think it's fascinating, his perspective, because he's concerned with men taking advantage of situations and women taking advantage of situations. Okay, sometimes we say, oh, it's always the men that do things, but women also can do things, can also play around with things. And he basically says, number one, he says they don't want women to basically claim that they're divorced and they're not really divorced. So they need a document in hand so that someone will say, okay, well, prove to us that you're divorced. This is a whole interesting thing because we don't actually keep the divorce document. That's a whole separate thing, but nowadays. But the other reason he gives is that it's to prevent men from divorcing their wives very quickly. Because, right, if you can just easily divorce her the same way you can betroth her with a ring or with something that has some sort of value, and you can easily get rid of the marriage in that way, well, men might divorce their wives very quickly, and they want to protect women that their husbands don't quickly just decide to divorce them. Okay, our sugya is going to be a little bit different from the situation that we described, because instead of, right, it sounds like from the Torah, we have the situation where the husband and wife are living together in the house, and the husband decides to divorce her, and he basically gives her this document, and then he sends her out of the house. What we're going to be learning is a bit of a different situation. It seems they're already living separately. It seems, okay, we're going to see that the man is not necessarily, he's a little bit more at fault in this situation. Okay, so our Mishnah is going to start off. I'm going to now pull up the Mishnah. The Mishnah starts off and says, Hasholech get liishto, v'higia bashaliach. Okay, so he now sends a get to his wife. We're going to see that in the Gemara, a lot of times they have this issue of a messenger. There's a messenger that's sending the get and not the husband himself. Okay, so as opposed to what we saw in the Torah where he gives the get, all of a sudden we're going to talk about a messenger. I saw that Becky before class, you wrote about the fact that, we had messenger in the daf today, and we're going to have messenger here. You'll see some repetition of some other things. And the daf today was all about what things you could do with one person, with two people, with three people. We're going to have the same 2 and 3 coming up in our Gemara as well. Anyway, the Mishnah says, if you send a get to your wife, vihigia bashaliach. Okay, what does this mean, vihigia bashaliach? Okay, this means that basically you send a get to your wife, and then, okay, the man sends a get to his wife, and he sends the messenger. The messenger is on the way to the woman. The woman's obviously not living with him. Okay, they're clearly not living together anymore. Okay, and that has to be an underwriting assumption of this sugya. Otherwise, it doesn't really make any sense. So he sends this get, and then he decides while the get is on the way, you know what? I don't really want to divorce her. Now, you might want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe he really wants to stay married to her, but it doesn't really seem that that's the situation with this guy. He's maybe being a little bit vindictive. So he doesn't want to give her the get. So what does he do? He gia b'shaliach. He catches up to the shaliach before the shaliach gets to the woman. once, and we'll see this at the very end of or the middle of the Mishnah, but the end of this section, which is once the get reaches the woman and she receives the get, there's nothing you could do. But what if he sends the messenger and the messenger's on the way to deliver the get, but he changes his mind? This is actually very similar to the sugya we were just learning in the Gemara. Anyone who's doing the daf about Me'ila, about how you send a messenger to do something for you, and then you realize that you gave them money, and then you want to stop them, but you can't reach them. Okay, so nowadays we have a lot of ways of reaching people, right? But in those days it was much more complicated. So either he catches up to the shaliach before the shaliach delivers the get, or he sends a messenger to get the other messenger, right? This is like the real lazy husband. He's sitting there. Okay, I sent a divorce document to my wife, but I don't really want to divorce her. So you know what? And I don't really want to waste my time finding the shaliach. I'll just send another messenger to get that other shaliach. V'amarlo. So those are two scenarios. And he says to him, either to the first messenger or to the second one, get shenatati lach batel. Okay, the get that I gave, get shenatati lecha. The get that I gave you to give to my wife is null and void. Okay? Hareza batel. That's it. The get is not a get. Kidem etzel ishto. What if he first gets to the wife? Okay, let's say he sends the messenger, but he doesn't know where the messenger is. So he shows up at his wife's house and he says, or wherever she is, maybe she's at her parents' house, and he says, listen, okay, it does the same thing. The get that I'm giving you is, in a few minutes, a shaliach's going to knock on the door and give you a get. But guess what? I decided I don't want to give it to you. Or he sends a messenger to her, which would be, if I were the husband, that would be a much smarter thing to do. I don't think my wife would be very pleased when I show up and I tell her, by the way, a get's coming your way, but I'm not giving it to you. It's also null and void. But as soon as she gets the get, and this is what I told you before, there's nothing to be done. So that's the base halacha. Now I'm going to send you into Chavruta, and what you're going to start to see is that there was a situation. Okay, the Mishnah is going to start off with Barishona. Okay, what I did here on the sheet, by the way, if you want to, you can do review and go through all the cases. You don't need to do this. This is question number one. If you want, you can do a review about what all these cases are. Okay, but then we're going to move to Barishona. Initially, there was another way, in addition to all these methods that we mentioned of how the husband could cancel the get. Now they're going to say there was another way that he could actually do it. And that was what Rabban Gamliel didn't like. And Rabban Gamliel changed things because of Tikun Olam. And that's what you're going to see. And that's what we're going to learn. We're going to learn this whole sugya about this takana that Rabban Gamliel instituted, which we don't yet know the reason why. You could try to think about it on your own when you learn the Mishnah. And then later in the Gemara, we're going to first learn a different machloket about how you nullify a get in front of how many people it needs to be. And then we're going to connect that with another machloket as to why Rabban Gamliel instituted this takana that he did and what was his purpose. Okay, so with that, I will send you to Chavruta. We'll do 30, we'll do 40, we'll do 45 minutes of Chavruta. Okay.